Asterisk, you can actually connect to the Skype network as a native peer using Asterisk. That's actually in beta right now, closed beta. We're a part of that beta, but hopefully that'll be released soon because, of course, being able to interconnect and develop applications for the Skype network is quite powerful, joining them together with all the other channels. The last thing is that Asterisk is very flexible. It can be many different things. It's similar to Apache in that it has a loadable module capability where you can, one day you can make it a voicemail server, the next day a conferencing server, the next day a click-to-call server, or a call center server as well. So I know a lot of people here are actually web developers or come from the web domain and don't necessarily have the telephony expertise. So what you see here on the right is, it's a little bit of a simplification, but I think it gets the idea across that when you have Apache, you have your software such as Ruby on Rails as your development framework, MERB, etc., that's serving up your web applications. If you look on the voice side, what you're serving up is Asterisk, which is really handling the voice channel. And then on top of that, Adhearsion is really the framework that you use to develop your applications that are voice-centric on that side. And then, of course, you have the ability around static HTML on the website. Asterisk, you could develop applications in a static way as well, right, within it. So there's a lot of similarities in terms of how the two interact. And then, of course, Adhearsion also bridges between them. So it actually integrates to Ruby on Rails directly, and we'll go into that a little bit later as well. So in terms of the architecture, Adhearsion is a separate framework. It's not Ruby on Rails. It does integrate to Ruby on Rails and share some of the same libraries like active support and active record, right? And what you have the ability to do is then build modules on top of that, which then run on Ruby. And one of the other things we've done is really made sure that it maintains JRuby compatibility. Because we believe in terms of performance, in terms of developing enterprise application, it's important to focus on JRuby today and not have anything that requires C extensions, et cetera, right? So with that, you have the ability to do inbound, outbound, IVR, conferencing, web services support. Of course, it has full support for Active Record or Data Mapper if you want to use that as well within there. And then, of course, native integration to Rails, which we'll go into a bit later. What's interesting is, as far as Asterisk is concerned, it has really two APIs that you deal with. AGI is very similar to CGI. So a call comes in, or what would be the equivalent of a session, then you execute an application on the back end in Adhearsion, then that serves that particular session. And then you also have another protocol, which is AMI, or the Asterisk Manager interface, into Adhearsion, which really allows you to handle all of the events and issue third-party commands to act upon those call sessions, such as transferring them around, playing messages, moving them in and out of conferences. And what's interesting here in terms of Adhearsion.8 was released in January, and there were some significant changes made. And one of the things that Jay did in terms of the core architecture is we're actually using Raggle to do that parsing. And if anyone knows Raggle, it's actually it's like regular expressions on crack, right? And you get a state machine out of that, et cetera. And the beauty of that is right now we're using the Ruby side of that in terms of the Ruby extensions that it can create. But if you need a performance boost, you can compile those into Java very easily. Then you have full Java support for that protocol parsing on that side. So it's very scalable as far as that goes. Another key point, and a problem I often see on the IRC or the support channels, is that Adhearsion's very concurrent, right? We've actually taken some of the inspiration from Erlang, which I think someone mentioned in their presentation yesterday, where you have the ability to take the actor model and say, okay, I've got all these different threads that I'm dealing with, handling all of these different calls within this thread pool. So everything you're doing in here is actually multi-threaded and thread safe, but of course, when you're developing components and applications, you've got to make sure you're using mutex, you're protecting your shared object space, all of these capabilities. So what are some of the applications that have been developed for this? There's a gentleman by the name of Dave Troy out of the US, who some of you may know, who's actually quite an active Ruby developer. He's actually the guy who developed Twitter Vision and Flickr Vision, right? And before the 2008 election last November in the US, he actually created a Twitter vote report, because there was a big growing concern in the US that there were going to be some election issues like there had been in the past. So the idea behind the Twitter vote report is allow people to report what their polling wait times are or any of their polling issues were, and to Twitter those, email those, or call in and provide those details. And from beginning to end, it took him 2 weeks to develop this application, integrate it to Google, and he actually has some very interesting analytics and visualizations of the data that was created that actually show what was happening, throughout the election in terms of wait times and issues coming up. But the point here is that it's really about, not just about developing a voice application, but including voice as part of a multimodal set of capabilities into your web applications, giving the user the choice to actually say, I want to phone into your application today, or tomorrow I want to tweet to it, or I want to email to it, etc. It's really important, and you now have the capability, because of the open source tools out there, to actually go ahead and include voice within your applications. So how does Adhearsion work? It has a generator very similar to Rails, where you have an AHA command that gets installed. And really, if you're on a Mac, it's just gem install Adhearsion, and you have the Adhearsion application up and running. It's hosted on RubyForge, but then we do the version control on GitHub. So you actually run the generator, create your application, and of course it creates all of your subdirectories and files that you actually need to run a framework application, where the dial plan is really what gets launched like an index HTML when you have a session or a phone call come in. And it's the logic, and you'll see this in a moment, that gets applied to that particular call. You have events RB, which is where you may actually enable the event subsystem, so you can see all events coming off of your telephony system, such as where a call is landing, when it's been answered. You can do billing off of it, all of these capabilities. And then, of course, configuration and components. And a key element, and we'll go into this in a little more detail, is the component capability of Adhearsion, which one of the issues you've had within the telephony domain for quite some time is that you can't really share code, right? So if you're doing these systems within asterisk, this is a little distracting, but I'll keep trying. You keep developing applications within asterisk or other telephony systems, they're really kind of stuck inside of that domain, and it's very difficult to actually share them between applications. So one of the key design elements of Adhearsion is components, because we really want to make it easy for someone to develop a plugin, like a Rails plugin, for example, and then share that with the community, right? So you create a specific unit of capability, and you may install it like a gem as part of the roadmap, but right now it's, copy your files in there. So taking a look at a basic dial plan. Now hopefully you can see that okay up there. So this is what you have within asterisk, which is the asterisk dial plan, which will make a call out to Adhearsion, right? And then on this side is your actual dial plan. And what we've done is created a domain-specific language, right, where we publish a set of verbs, as part of the API. So you can see up there, you actually just have a method that says answer. That'll pick up the phone call, answer it as far as Adhearsion is concerned, and then start treating that. And here we're actually asking for input, where you're saying input up to 5 digits, go ahead and play a particular message. And this message could be speech synthesis or text-to-speech, or a pre-recorded file as well. You have your accept key. A lot of times you use the hash key. Maybe you want to use something else when you're interacting with an IVR or voice system. And then, of course, your timeout. And there's capabilities, which you'll see in a bit, on how you want to repeat, etc. And then you can take those results and act upon them, where you can play messages on the call as well, right? Events. Events is really one of the more powerful elements of Adhearsion, because what most of the open source telephony frameworks out there do today that are related to asterisk and other platforms is they're really libraries, right? So you have a library that might help you interact with a particular protocol interface of asterisk. Adhearsion is really one of the few. The other one that's probably closest is asterisk Java. That's really a full-fledged framework, right? So it's not just a library connecting, it's actually a framework that lets you deal with your whole application holistically within that. So your event subsystem, this is where you have a block that you're passing. So as each event comes in, you execute that block and do whatever you want to on that particular event. So what you may see up there, we're actually saying as each event comes in on the manager interface, go ahead and take a look at what the name of that event is, and then take a particular action on that. Another element is you can actually put hooks in there, or callbacks, right? Where you say if a particular type of call comes in, before the call gets placed, I want to execute an action such as set up a billing record within Active Record. Or when the call hangs up, go ahead and terminate that billing session and complete it as well. Lastly, you have the Adhearsion components that I was talking about before. And there's really 4 major areas of the component system. The first one you see up there is the global capabilities, where you can put in a helper method that's available to every aspect of the framework. The next one is really the methods for the dial plan. So you may easily extend that DSL that's within the dial plan to include new methods to do virtually anything. Example we're talking about here is maybe when you create a new conference call, you want to update Twitter with this conference call started, who's on the call as people join, etc. And you can easily extend the dial plan to do that. One of the adhesion, the name actually comes from the idea of adhesion you can hear, right? Or no, adhesion you can hear, which is this idea of where adhesion shines best is when you're integrating with back-end data systems, web services, etc. Then you have the event subsystem as well, where you can publish methods there. And one thing we've been doing quite a bit of work with in some of our projects that we've been working on with Adhearsion is doing work with CouchDB. I don't know if you noticed CouchDB was actually used by Chef. It's a schemaless object store where you store everything as JSON. And what's very interesting here is you can actually record all of your events happening into this database, right, CouchDB, and then later come along and actually build all of your business rules and reporting and everything you need to later on that. And it's actually quite powerful in the world of telephony. And one of the more interesting things here is the methods for RPC that you may see here. It has an entire RPC subsystem which automatically creates the REST JSON interface, DRB, and the stomp message queue as well. So by adding methods here, you're actually creating and extending the API of Adhearsion directly, right? And that RPC subsystem could be extended to use SOAP XML, but of course we're finding everyone using REST JSON primarily. So people have actually come in and already integrated PHP cake applications or Java applications using Adhearsion as the interface to the telephony subsystem, but then publishing the APIs on the backside here. And an API might be used to do something like originate a phone call or get information on when a caller comes in to trigger something within the web interface. And we have a lot of applications where people are actually tying their web session together with their call session. So as I'm on the website, I've actually got a phone call and everything is actually tied together as one single session on that side using the RPC subsystem. So what I'd like to do now, and I'm going to sit down for this, I hope no one minds, is show you some of the code and capabilities. So what we have here is the asterisk actually running. So I'm actually running everything locally here on my laptop. I didn't want to rely on the wireless network after seeing some of the things that happened before and always happen during live demos. So I've got asterisk running here, and I also have Adhearsion. And the way you may see I started Adhearsion here, and can you see this all right? Is it big enough for everyone? Okay. You actually just say Adhearsion start. You may run it as a daemon, of course, or interactively where you also get logging from that side. Down here, I actually have a freely available voice over IP softphone that uses SIP that connects locally to my asterisk machine. We did test the sound before and it was working, so hopefully it's still working because it's pretty important to have sound for voice applications. So what you have here is, I'm going to do a few examples. I think there's a total of 4 of them. This is obviously the hello world. And you have the concept here, the Adhearsion curly brace, and then that block of code is really the call context. So as you have calls coming into your system, you may want to classify them based on what number they're calling, what they're calling for, who that person is. So you pass them to a context which plays, or sets a particular set of logic for that user. So this one's simply going to do a play hello world, and we'll see if the simple one works first. Let me turn it up.
Hello, world.
Right? So you have the ability to actually, play messages. You may do speech synthesis, and I'll show some of that later. And the key is that while right here I'm using, the X-Lite softphone, this can just as easily be a Java softphone that exists that may connect to this, that lives inside your browser. Flash is including voice over IP capabilities. Right now they do, but it's becoming more mature in the next release of Flash. But it depends on, once again, you've got to provide a system that allows users to make the choice, because a lot of users don't want to use voice in their browser because maybe they don't have a headset to talk, or they're not comfortable with that. So it's, once again, providing that multimodal capability within that. So my next example that I have up here is where I'm going to go ahead and ask for input. Now, Adhearsion's actually doing a check of the modified time of the file, so I don't have to restart anything. It will actually pick up the changes I just made within the dial plan and then go ahead and execute those. This one, what I'm doing is I'm simply saying answer the call, and then give me the result of this input that I'm asking. And I'm asking for up to 5 digits, play a message. In this case, I'm just asking for a password as a simple application. The accept key, I'm doing a hash, but it could just as easily be a splat, whatever you want it to be. The timeout. And in this case, I'm not going to loop. I'll show you in a moment how you would do looping. There's part of the DSL that actually allows you to do that, where you can say, try up to 3 times. If you have an issue or a timeout, play a message, try again, etc. This one we're just going to ask once and then go ahead and play the result of whatever was entered in there and then hang up. Hopefully this will work.
Password.
I'm going to enter 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, I have to hit hash.
1,234.
So once again, a simple capability of interacting with the user. Now this could be speech recognition as well, where the user would actually speak what their input is, just as easily as it can be DTMF input. There are open source engines that support speech recognition, such as Sphinx, and open source that do speech synthesis, such as Festival. But in reality, they're not that great, and you're better off going with a commercial application unless you want to spend a lot of time fine-tuning those. Later in the demo, I'm actually using the Alex voice on OS X to do some generation, because it's actually a pretty good text-to-speech engine, but not a lot of people run production applications, on OS X for voice. So, excuse me. So, oops. The next example I have is showing the menu capability, which is a key part of the DSL that makes things very easy. So the difference between this one and the input is I'm actually constructing a menu for the user to interact with here. So I don't have to say answer, because Adhearsion knows if you're going to play the menu command, you need to answer the phone first, so it'll answer it and then do it. Or you can explicitly state that if you're trying to do some fancier things. So on this side, what you're saying is create a menu, and I'm going to play my IVR menu, which is the message. Once again, I have my timeout, and in this case, you actually see I have my tries. So I can try up to 3 times in this case. And then do, and I pass it a block. And then I have the ability to say, okay, if you hit 1, you're hitting the sales department. If you hit 2, you're hitting shipping. If you hit complaints, is number 3, and you're gonna go from there. Then I can say if there's a premature timeout, I can say please try again. So if the user hasn't entered anything, a lot of times, DTMF, which is what you push on your keyboard on the phone, won't get passed. Or maybe, some people still have rotary dial systems, or phones as well, so they can't hit anything. And then also, if the 3 times have failed, then you say on failure, try again. And in this case, I should actually hang up, right? Hang up that user and then say, try again, call back later. Obviously, you're having a problem. And then these links actually associate to additional contexts down here. So you may see I had link sales, right? So if you hit 1, you're going to come down and execute this block here, and you're going to play a well-known hello world type asterisk sound file. Or if you hit shipping, it's another sound file. Or if you hit complaints, it just says goodbye and hangs up, right? As most places would. All right, so this one, you can see you have a more sophisticated way of interacting, and it's very straightforward. You don't have to know a lot about telephony, about how the voice system works, about SIP and voice over IP and Skype and everything else. All of this stuff just works as part of this DSL within Adhearsion. So if I go ahead and dial.
Welcome to Acme Shipping. Please press 1 for the sales department, 2 for the shipping department, or 3 for complaints. Welcome to Acme Shipping.
Okay, I didn't play my message
Please
properly,
press
but
1 for the sales department, 2 for the shipping department, or 3 for complaints.
So now I'll hit 1, and you can see it's playing TT Monkeys, which if you're an asterisk developer is very well known. So, but enough of that. So you get an idea of how you create that system interactivity within that, and now how you can use that becomes very interesting. And I'm looking forward to the presentation after mine, which is Row Mobile, because of course as you start tying the actual ability to control the voice channel with your web applications on smartphones, you can do some very, very interesting things. So let's take a look at the configuration file here quickly. Under config you have the startup RB, which is a little bit like your environment file under Rails. And you have the ability to set up your logging within here and the logging level. And what's interesting about the way we do logging is we actually namespace it, right? Because when you're doing telephony, you can have a lot of events happening all over the place, and you have 100 phone calls coming in. It can be very difficult to trace that stuff through logs. So being able to namespace your logging is important, because then you can dump it into something like Splunk, if anyone's familiar with Splunk here, which actually allows you to parse the log files and do filtering and all sorts of interesting things on that side, which in the telephony domain is very important. And then you have the ability to set options such as automatically answer phone calls, hang up automatically, etc. And the most important piece I wanted to show here is the ability to integrate with Rails, right? So if you want to integrate with Rails, you simply pass it a path wherever your Rails application is at, which development you want, or which environment you want to use, in this case development. And what it's doing is it's actually taking the environment and all of the models from your Rails application and using them and making them available within Adhearsion. So if you're following good, what I like to think is good approach to Rails, thin controllers, fat models, you can take all of that business logic from that domain, pass it directly into Adhearsion, and use it within your active record logic on the voice telephony side. So it's very easy then, once again, with a Rails application to create that multimodal capability using all that same underlying business logic that exists in your models. Of course, if you're not using Rails, we do have it built in where you can simply enable a database. In this case, it's using active record, and you just go take some models somewhere. There's a lot of people using Adhearsion that aren't using Rails that just still want to access the database, and they're going to use active record in this case to do that. And then, of course, this is also the file where you would drop in any of your other library requirements, such as JSON. And then they get picked up globally for the rest of the system. So you can really think about it as your environment RB type of file. The components, quickly. You have Simon game. That's not a good one. Let me pull up my other one here. Let's see. I have a survey example, which I'll also play for you guys here in a moment. Surveys is this idea, there's a big trend that's happening in the enterprise marketplace right now, where every company really wants to collect customer experience and then run analytics on it to see how they should be changing their business processes or changing their marketing or their customer care and things like that. So we've seen an uptick in demand for people wanting to play surveys to a customer after they're done speaking to someone or with a transaction. So you can transfer them to this particular application. It'll ask them to rate their experience speaking to the particular agent or completing a particular transaction, etc. And we've actually distributed this as an example component. And each component has its own YAML configuration file that, once again, is namespaced, where you can put in whatever specific configuration you need for that particular component. So in this case, you have the ability to use the various text-to-speech engines, depending on if you're on Linux or on OS X. And in this case, we're using the OS X Say, and then which voice it's using. And then, of course, you have your surveys over here, which is actually as you may see, what we showed before within the components. You have your methods for dial plan, where you can actually say create the file. And back here, you've also got the GUI, which is actually a Rails application. And I cheated a little bit, and you'll notice here I actually used Hobo, if you're familiar with Hobo, because all I'm doing is really prototyping and showing something here, and I wanted something a little bit better than scaffolding in terms of the look and feel. So this is all within the database, where I have 3 tables. I have my surveys here, and I'm saying, okay, if it was a new account customer or transaction, I'm going to play the new account, right? And then I have the ability to associate questions that get played to the user. So such as agent knowledge might be a typical one you ask. And the text-to-speech that it's actually going to play is, was the agent knowledgeable and able to answer your questions, blah, 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 right? What order you want the questions to play in, and then, of course, a range, which is your valid responses. So this is an example of where an entire voice application gets driven out of the database as a Rails application as well, right? And then, of course, I'm recording all of the responses, whatever they may be, that may be analyzed out of the database later. So let's see. Let me run that one so you get a flavor for that. EuRuKon was actually the show I was at earlier this week. I was a little bit lazy, so I didn't rename it to EuRuKo, and that's why it still says EuRuKon. So I'm going to go ahead and start this one. We've got the web interface there. It should already be up and running. It's initialized. If I dial in, we should hear it ask the hopefully it answers.
Welcome to the Acme Survey Service. We appreciate you taking the time to provide your feedback. Please answer the following questions with your touch-tone keypad. Was the agent knowledgeable and able to answer your questions during the creation of your new account? Did the time it took to set up your account meet your expectations? Please rate on a scale from 1 to 5, 1 being too long and 5 being quick.
So if I enter 6,
invalid selection. Please try again. Did the time it took to set up your account meet your expectations? Please rate on a scale from 1 to 5. Please rate your overall experience with our account setup process, using 1 for a poor experience to 5 for fantastic. Thanks again for answering the Acme Survey Service. Your feedback is appreciated. Goodbye.
All right, so that gives you a flavor in terms of how Adhearsion works, the types of applications. Of course, I've kept them relatively simple. Some of the other applications we've written with Adhearsion are things like conferencing systems where people are doing late night chats on broadcast TV using their mobile phone or their telephone to call in and participate and actually control online avatars or on-screen avatars through their touch-tone pad and voice recognition, etc. So there's a lot of interesting applications you may come up with. Now I'll stand back up. So one of the things we've done, because we understand for a lot of people in the Ruby community, we're kind of in a unique place, because in the telephony world, a lot of people don't get web technologies, and in the web world, a lot of people don't get telephony technologies, right? So we're kind of at a strange intersection. So one of the things we've really done is tried to lower that barrier of entry, and we've created our sandbox application. And what the sandbox is if you do gem install Adhearsion, go to the sandbox, sign up for an account, and then enable, and there's a complete set of instructions there where you can enable a component that will connect you to an asterisk box that we're running on our network. So you actually just start writing your Adhearsion applications. Somebody playing with it now? So you start writing Adhearsion applications. You don't have to worry about asterisk. You don't have to worry about setting any of that up, because asterisk does have a fairly steep learning curve to get started with it, because it's quite unusual in terms of how you configure it, etc. And then we make 4 different ways to dial in to that application. You can dial in over a US phone number, over a Java browser client, via Skype, because we actually have Skype enabled on that sandbox. And there's a 4th one, I don't remember what another soft phone called Gizmo. So we encourage people to go there to get started. Although I think last night Jay was actually working on it, so I can't promise it's actually working right now, because he may still be working on it, but we were doing some upgrades. But the idea is they're really to get you started. It's not meant to run production applications, but to get you comfortable, aware of what's happening, what you can do with it, and then actually go and start working with it. One of the things I'm doing once I get back is I'm actually publishing an Amazon machine image for EC2 that has a full development stack with asterisk, Adhearsion, CouchDB, and all of the example components we've written, which will be made public, and then you can just fire it up on EC2 and start playing with it. And then a future iteration of that will actually be to publish an ISO as well. Another thing I'd like to touch upon, because I think it's very interesting, and I know it was touched upon in one of the lightning talks yesterday, which is we really firmly believe everything's moving towards the cloud for telephony. Because if Rails has a business hosting Rails app, or excuse me, EngineYard has a business hosting Rails apps, telephony apps are, let's say, a magnitude more involved to deploy and scale than even a web application. So we've been working with a company out of the US called Voxel, which is one of the top, let's say, 3 voice XML. And voice XML is the telephony standard way of developing applications, but it's very enterprisey, it's heavy development, etc. And we worked with them since the beginning of the year, Jay and I did, on developing a new platform called Tropo, which was released at Emerging Communications in San Francisco in March, where instead of doing VXML, CCXML, right now you actually have the ability to just pass it a script. And that script can be, as you can see the 5 here, JavaScript, Groovy, PHP, Python, and the one that we like, Ruby. And behind the scenes, it's actually using JRuby and Jython and all of these platforms. And now instead of having to pass XML back and forth, you're just using a standard API, which in Ruby is like passing a hash back and forth. And you have callbacks, the ability to handle events, etc. And one of the things we're doing here is we're working on a protocol with them. So instead of passing them a script, we actually have a TCP socket with a full set of APIs that we can actually drive the cloud just like we do Asterisk today. So now what you can do is you can develop an Adhearsion application with this platform, well not today, but soon. And instead of having to worry about installing your own Asterisk, you just run it in the cloud. And these guys actually provide full text-to-speech, speech recognition, all of these capabilities as well. So the whole idea is to provide multiple ways of developing Adhearsion applications. We're also working with some people from the conference here to support other platforms besides Asterisk as well. There's other open source telephony engines like FreeSwitch, Yate, that are out in the marketplace. And the idea is to put Adhearsion on many of these platforms as possible. You develop your application once, and as much as possible, it ports with whatever platform you want to run within your own environment. All right, you can find more on Adhearsion here. We've got our website. We have a wiki. Our documentation is always getting better, but we've really focused on documentation with this new release. We've been using Yard to do all the API documentation as well. So it's fully, it's mostly full out there, and of course it's all, it's got, I think, something like 94% test coverage of everything as well within the platform. And that's what I wanted to cover. So any questions or anything else you'd like to see? I think we've got another 10 minutes. Yes.
Thank you. Yes. Okay, thanks. I was actually wondering, because you demonstrated dialing in, but since you also mentioned that some companies are linking this to their web session, is it also possible to do it the other way around? So, for instance, you click on a button on a website, and then you have Asterisk call the user, and he picks up, and then he enters the menu. Is it possible with this?
Yes, and that's where you use the AMI capability. So AGI is really for handling inbound calls, and that's the dial plan that I was showing you. You can have within a component where you actually say, I want to originate a phone call, right? And maybe I might have an example here I could show you quickly as well. No. No, I erased it actually. So, but I can explain it to you anyway. You have the ability to do an originate, right? Where you say, I want to place a phone call to this particular number, and then you can pass it to a dial plan and then execute whatever logic you want that dial plan to do. And that dial plan can dial a second number, right? So if you want to bridge two numbers together, or it can dial into a particular application. And then the other thing you can do within Adhearsion is you have the ability, we have a method, new GUID, and you can use that new GUID, store that as part of the object of that call, and tie that to whatever cookie you have on the session side. And I do have an example. There's actually a screencast of it on Blip TV that we've done that shows you how to write a AJAX application where you do a click to call between two channels. It connects, and then you're getting updates of the status of that call in the browser, right? And then you can actually hang up from the browser as well. So it's a simple example, but it shows you how to tie things together when originating calls outbound as well. You had a question?
Hi. Hi, you said the voice recognition and text-to-speech that are open source, the libraries don't work so well. So which commercial ones would you recommend? Particularly ones that work on Linux, because most people don't deploy to Mac OS X. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's easy to use the built-in OS X one. The ones I've usually used when I'm using standard Asterisk are Kepstrel And Kepstrel is a good speech synthesis engine that has probably 30 different voices that they support. Some are better than others. And it's relatively inexpensive compared to others. And we've actually been working with them to expose a web service, right? And they're doing it through SOAP XML, where I can pass it my text and it'll return me my voice file. So I don't have to install anything locally to do text-to-speech, right? Once again, more on the cloud side of things. So we're working with them on that right now. On the flip side, for speech recognition, in the Asterisk world, it's LumenVox. And LumenVox is a plugin that you can plug into Asterisk that will do speech recognition and give you grammars and allow you to pass those back and forth. But LumenVox is a bit on the expensive side, just like any speech recognition is. The industry leader is actually a company by the name of Nuance. And here, because LumenVox may only support English, US Spanish, and maybe German, because some of the founders are German. In Europe, you have an engine called Loquendo, which is out of Italy, which supports a broader number of the European languages and is available on Asterisk as well. But I don't have direct experience using Loquendo a lot, but from what I hear, it's actually quite good. We've also developed integration that works today with Tropo, where you can still have everything happening with an Adhearsion and Asterisk, and then you dial in a Tropo session to do your speech recognition or text-to-speech, grab the information back, and then throw the session away and continue on within Asterisk. So there's a lot of ways to do it, but one thing to keep in mind is Asterisk doesn't have text-to-speech or speech recognition built in out of the box, because in that space there's a lot of patents and licensing and encumbrances that keep there from being a lot of really good open source solutions today. Yep.
Hi, Jason. My question is basically, once you've actually developed your Adhearsion application, what options do you have to deploying it, moving to production?
Yes.
I mean, you've mentioned Tropo, but apart from that, what else do you have?
Yep. Right now what it is today is you've really got to be able to take Asterisk and scale it. One of the things we're doing right now is, and I was interested in the talk yesterday on Chef, is looking at a way where you could have a chef recipe or a cookbook that handles deploying Asterisk for you, because you've got to download it, you've got to compile it, it has its own set of configuration files and things like this. So we're working on ways to make that easier, which I think Chef would actually help the broader Asterisk community even outside of Adhearsion and what they're doing there. And because you're dealing with a real-time application, the way you deploy it is a little bit different. And what we always recommend is, if it's possible at all, to not have any hardware. So if you can avoid connecting to the TDM or the regular phone network, and you get voice over IP trunks, then you may deploy exclusively as software with no specialized hardware, and then you can start using virtualization. So we've had people who have deployed using VMware, where you have an image with Asterisk on it with Adhearsion, and you deploy that way across multiple boxes. We've also had some people do things on EC2 as well in production, but I haven't seen someone scale that to tens of thousands of calls as of yet. Another thing to consider is, if you're dealing with large inbound call traffic and you're going to have multiple Asterisk boxes doing load balancing and failover, then you have to start bringing in SIP proxies, like OpenSIPs is another example, to actually handle that load balancing coming in from the various networks to do that. So it can still be a fairly involved process. And that's why we think long-term there's a large opportunity for hosting these types of applications, allowing you to deploy your Adhearsion app like Google App Engine, right? And just not worry about any of that back-end telephony stuff and let it run.
So is that what Tropo.com is going to be?
They're moving in that direction. They're not there today. It's going to be a protocol, but it will allow you to have an Adhearsion application running yourself and then just control their network, as if it was a hosted telephony switch or telephony engine sitting up there. So that's the direction it's moving. But it's really alpha, kind of moving into beta right now. But it's quite interesting. And quickly on that, Tropo is not available in Europe today, right? So, but they have data centers in the UK, building one in Germany, and plan to be moving within the next 3 to 6 months as well. Any other back there?
Yeah, hello. You mentioned free switch briefly.
Yes.
How far is it? Is it already ready for production, or what's the time frame?
Yeah, so Jay had actually developed some bindings on free switch version .7, I think it was, and hasn't touched it since, right? And Jan Kuber, who's actually sitting back there, has developed another Ruby framework to work with Adhearsion, or with free switch, and we've been looking at how quickly we can create the abstraction layer between Adhearsion asterisk so that it may be easily ported to free switch in the other platforms. So it's really a two-step process where we need to make sure it's fully abstracted, which is really something Jay is working on right now, and then other people in the community are actually going to help flush out the free switch bindings. And in reality, I think the free switch bindings can be there relatively quickly once we get that abstraction over. But right now, the bindings that exist in a branch really don't work because free switch, I think, is version 1.1 now. So it's come a long way since that was originally done. And we've also been doing some work with Yate, which is a telephony engine that was developed by a group in Romania, and it stands for Yet Another Telephony Engine. And what's good about that one is it's probably the most pure engine of any of them. Some of the issues with Asterisk and Free Switch is they have a lot of applications kind of built into them that really don't belong in the engine. They belong in an application space like Adhearsion. And Yate is really just give me call bridging where I can take two channels, bridge them together, move them around, and do things with them in my application space, and let the engine do what it does well, which is handle the voice over IP and call connections and things like that. So those are really the three open source platforms we want to target. Probably full support for all of them no later than the end of this year is the idea, but we'll see. Another question back there.
Hey, so you mentioned you can have multiple asterisk boxes, but what if you find the bottleneck is in adhesion?
Sorry,
Take it to the top.
No,
Sorry.
The hand at the top. Okay.
So you mentioned you can have more asterisk processes, but if you find the bottleneck in adhesion, can you use more adhesion? Maybe more machines with adhesion. How would you do that? Like, how would you handle traffic from asterisk to adhesion in case you have more boxes?
Yeah, exactly. Generally we found that adhesion is not the bottleneck because asterisk, can be the bottleneck much quicker. But if you're, designing things in a very, scalable way, you'll have multiple adhesion boxes as well. And within the asterisk dial plan, you have the ability either through a DNS round robin to load balance on those to actually say, hit this adhesion box and then this adhesion box. And since it's very much like Rails, you're getting the same, capabilities across each of those on that side. One of the tricky bits you have, though, is how you can logically handle if two calls are coming in and they somehow need to be related, right, across those two instances. Then you have to account for that, and that can be more involved in terms of how you do that. But that's why you have, DRB built in to be able to do that inter-process communication as well, right? So we've had customers where effectively they have two AGI steps in Asterisk, which is like a call to CGI, where you say, try this box first. If it doesn't respond in X, try this box, and you've got multiple adhesion boxes on the back end. One thing that we haven't really completed yet, and that's also part of this abstraction process, is being able to connect one adhesion instance to multiple manager APIs of Asterisk. Right now, the AGI is very straightforward, but right now the AMI support within Adhearsion is really connected just to one Asterisk instance. So you'd have to have multiple Adhearsion apps to actually connect to multiple Asterisk manager instances. But there, I'd say, probably 60% of the use cases of how people have used Adhearsion only use the AGI/CGI type capability, and a smaller portion actually use the AMI. Because AMI, you're getting into the more sophisticated, complex applications where you might be moving calls around, you might be bridging them together and then pushing them, playing messages and pulling them back, things like that. Any other questions? All right, thank you. Appreciate it.
We were present from
Oh, wow. Thank you. Appreciate it.